Good evening, everybody, and welcome to An Aperitif with Luna Press. I'm Francesca Barbini, the director of Luna Press Publishing, and tonight I am here with two of our lovely resident author, Andrew Knighton and Lyndsey Croal. Welcome!
Hi.
Hiya.
All right, so tonight we are here to introduce you to the novellas for 2026. And before we go any further, I'm gonna let Lyndsey and Andy to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Lyndsey Croal. You might have seen me before with Luna Press with my book Dark Crescent, which was a collection of stories inspired by Scottish folklore. I'm based in Edinburgh, have kind of grown up all around Scotland, and I write sci-fi, horror, and folklore tinged dark stories. So I also have a collection of dark science fiction stories, Limelight and Other Stories, which came out in 2024. And this is my first, I guess, slightly longer book in the city where it rains. So really excited to have that coming out with Luna Press as well.
Excellent. Andy?
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew Knighton. I'm normally more of a fantasy writer. I've had a previous novella with Luna, Ashes of the Ancestors, which was shortlisted for the Subjective Chaos kind of award, which was very nice. Um, and I've got some novels and things, including the Forged for Destiny series with Orbit. Um, I work as a freelance writer, and I've done various other bits and pieces. I write comics for a DC Thomson, a Scottish publisher. I've done bits of games and short stories and ghostwriting, so stuff all over the place.
It is so good to have you here tonight to talk a little bit more about your novellas. So, what we're going to do is I would like to start with you, Andy, as
Mhm.
your novella is actually coming before Lyndsey
Okay.
in terms of our series.
Yeah.
So, do you want to tell us how you found the inspiration for your novellas?
Yeah. The story's called All That Is in the Earth, and it's a science fiction novella set in a distant future. It's about this planet that's being quarantined because of a deadly disease, which makes the living creatures there rot and attack each other. And so there's this assumption that there's no cure for it. So there's this assumption that anybody who ends up there is effectively dead already. And the protagonist, who's a research scientist called Clifford, he crash lands there after his space station in orbit is destroyed. And he's like, okay, I'm dead already. That's it. And just as he's kind of stood around feeling very sorry for himself, this woman called Emmy drives up in this big rig truck thing. And he discovers that there is this loose community of survivors. People are always on the move, on the run from these infected creatures, and finding the ingredients for this thing they found that's not a cure but helps them fend off the disease. So it turns from this thing of I'm dead already to a struggle for survival and this desperate attempt by some of the people involved to try and get out. Um, the inspiration behind it came from a couple of very different places. So the first one was I do quite a lot of live role play, and about 20 years ago, my friend Dan and I came up with this concept for this disease-themed sci-fi game we wanted to run. And it was the way we created the setting was designed around giving a reason why all these characters are stuck together for basically 2 days, which is the format for a weekend live roleplay event, and then scattering off afterwards. So why this moment and why this matters and what do they have to do and to give them a sense of purpose. So we built this whole world, this whole universe of where do these different people come from, what organizations are they from, what do they represent, and we built this whole thing for this game with this cycle of ingredients that they had to gather to give the players a fetch quest, essentially, that we never ran. And it's probably a good thing we never ran it. I don't actually, in retrospect, it wasn't, I'm not sure it would have worked as a game. And we were way too lazy. But I'd still got all these notes from it. I thought there's this really interesting setting here around where all the different participants are themed around disease, the way they're science fictional is connects into the concept of disease and wellness. So that was like there sitting in my notebooks. And then I'd been thinking I wanted to, I mean, I had been grappling with the theme, with the thoughts of how you deal with death and finality, and the fact that sooner or later we all come to an end.
Mhm.
And when I started thinking through that, I started taking a similar approach to the one I did with Ashes of the Ancestors, of having a theme and working out different ways people relate to that idea. So in Ashes, it was the different ways people relate to tradition and the past. And for this, it was the different ways they relate to the inevitability of death. I thought that fits really well with a setting where kind of people think they're dead already, where that's the approach, or where they're desperately struggling against death. So those things kind of slotted really neatly together. It's like, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And then as I was writing it, this weird third one came in, because part of the story is there's this cycle of ingredients that's essentially coming up from the ground of the planet. And we were replacing the soil in our garden at the time. And my partner she found this book on soil science by Jeff Lowenfels and Wayne Lewis, Teeming with Microbes, which is all about the microbiology of soil, like the stuff that lives in there, like the things we can't even see, the funguses that rot wood down, and the tiny microbes that eat the funguses, the insects that eat the microbes, and blah, blah, blah. And like that, in a lesser way, then fed into the setting and created Clifford, who then he knows the soil science, which gave him a way to understand more of what the other people didn't understand. So, like, I kind of jammed these things together, and they then became this. Like I say, it's a reflection on death, and that makes it sound like it's going to be, really angsty, and people sat around like, but it's a reflection on death in the form of a quite actiony sci-fi thriller where
Yes,
they're
it
fending
is.
off monsters and grappling with these cynical capitalistic soldiers, and
Yeah.
yeah, and that's all that is in the earth.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, and thank you so much. I think now it's time for you to give us a little taste of all that is in the earth.
This is the very beginning of all that's in the earth. Clifford didn't cry, despite the pain and the shock that shook his body, despite the dizziness so intense he wanted to puke himself unconscious, despite the mile-long trail of destruction his shuttle had torn through the emerald beauty of hell, blades of broken ship's hull scything through trees, friction and vented fuel scorching all life from its wake, despite the fact that his friends and colleagues were dead, despite the fact that he was as good as dead too. He didn't cry, because to cry would be to acknowledge the chasm that opened inside his mind, the unfathomable certainty of oblivion. He was too scared to cry, to run, to do anything except stare out through his helmet and the window beyond, into the heat haze and the smoke drifting out across a planet where only the dead dwelt. He prayed to a god he'd never believed in, and he stared. In orbit, everything had been stillness, the motion of the stars too slow to register in a sentient mind, the clouds that swirled across the face of Abaddon moving at a hypnotic pace. The vessels in orbit were all part of the blockade, gleaming tubes and tori bristling with weaponry and staffed with specialist observers, their mission to contain. Abaddon had no shuttles or elevators running to the surface, and the only ships passing through the area stopped off station while they unloaded supplies. He had seen more motion in a bare field on a parched summer's day. Down here, though, things were different. Lush leaves rustled, grasses shimmered. Trees, 100 times taller than Clifford, swayed to the music of the wind. In the blackened trail he'd ripped through that life, chunks of dirt and debris shifted, while flames crawled with flickering brightness into the drier stands of undergrowth. Oily smoke trickled upward, coalesced into a column, spread into a grey smear against which birds whirled. The whole world seemed so alive, which made it all the more bitter to know that he was dead. A hollow gaped inside his heart. Every nerve around it was raw, aching, longing for the life he had lost. It wasn't even dread. That was too concrete a word for what he faced. To dread something, you had to be able to imagine it, and Clifford had no idea how death would feel. All he knew was life and the desperate desire not to lose that. The glass of his helmet clinked against the glass of the window as he tried to get a better view. The shuttle was tipped on its side, the door halfway horizontal, everything thrown into angles that added to his disorientation. His world had twisted off its axis. Something was moving at the edge of the forest. Perhaps it would eat his body once this was over. The scattered brethren believed that there was hope in returning to the cycle of life, becoming part of another living thing. But Clifford had never found comfort in mysticism. Death was death. The mind ended with the body, and no illusions could shelter him from that. The safety of the shuttle was one of those illusions now. It had saved him from the destruction of Eldwise Station, carried him clear of the blasts rocking the station and ahead of the power plant's cataclysmic collapse. But even before debris pierced his engines, he'd known that he was on the wrong course, that the autopilot carrying him down into the quarantine zone, not up and away. Then there had been vibrations, smoke, screeching, and an atmospheric entry in which he'd only just kept the shuttle flying straight. Now, as he pressed his helmet against the glass, he saw a crack. There we go. That's the beginning.
On a cliffhanger. Oh,
Don't leave people anymore. Right?
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. All
That's right.
depth in the earth. Very exciting. Okay, well, let's introduce a different setting in not quite a so luscious green landscape. And so, Lyndsey, can you tell us a little bit about the novella and your inspiration for it?
Sure. So yeah, also with a similarly long title, In This City Where It Rains. It's a Scottish Gothic horror novella, and it's set in a sort of alternative version of Edinburgh. And it mostly follows a young woman, Maggie, who can see ghosts that only appear in the rain. But it is always raining in the city, so the city's sort of cursed with this eternal rain. Maybe that was inspired by Edinburgh, I'm not sure. She thinks she's the only one that can see ghosts. She kind of navigates the city with this kind of strange, unmoving city, thinking she's the only one until she runs into someone at the bar she works that can also see ghosts, and that leads her to a strange house in the center of the city where it's not raining and where there are strange things afoot. So that's where it kind of comes to the sort of classic Gothic house within the city later on. So yeah, I mean, in terms of inspirations, it was quite a broad inspirations, I guess. I mean, I've always wanted to write a Gothic story set in Edinburgh. I've lived there a long time, kind of born there, so it's somewhere I want to write about for a long time. I also like had this image of this bar for a story once, and I never quite got into that specific like bar in a basement with sort of weird kind of atmosphere, which is closed now, but I remember going to it a few times and thinking this would make a cool place for a story. But the actual kind of seed of the story was from, similar to Andy, like a different project. So I was commissioned by Erin Nothingness Press, who are a really lovely small press. I do a lot of anthologies to write a story inspired by psychogeography, which is kind of the way of navigating a city through unconventional means, or an urban landscape, unconventional means. And the first thing that came to my mind was someone navigating a city using ghosts. And that's where the kind of hook of the story came from. I started writing it and realized it was a longer project than a short story. And it just kind of grew arms and legs, as stories tend to do. And I wrote a different story for that anthology, which was also quite fun to do. And yeah, the other kind of, I guess, spark and inspiration that I'd heard along kind of quite a few years ago on a writing retreat while I was up in Place Moniac Moor, where I've also just came back from last week, which is like a lovely writing retreat centre. But near there, there's a story of on Loch Ness Bullskin House, which is a house that appears to sort of have a local curse to it. It's burned down a number of times and suspicious circumstances, but the reason people think it's cursed is because it was once the home of Aleister Crowley, who was one of the most like infamous occultists and most evil man in Britain at one point coined. So he used to apparently do rituals in that house, and the theory is that he didn't close the circle and left, leaving the house cursed. And it's had various interesting ownerships and things. I think I wrote more about it in a blog for Luna Press, so you can read that at some point in a bit more detail. But yes, that I'd always thought that would be a kind of interesting story to write about. I'm kind of fascinated by ghost lore and occult rituals and things like that. So I pulled all of those things together. They eventually made it into the book, and without too many spoilers, I'll not say how. Um, but yeah, it's very much a sort of gothic love letter to Edinburgh. I wanted it to be a sort of classic ghost story, but with a bit of a twist. I wrote this most of it actually in a month. I was spent doing a writing residency at a place called Hawthornden Castle, where they offer kind of writing residencies for a month for writers. So I was very fortunate to get to go spend a month living in a castle just on the outskirts of Edinburgh in the winter. It was very cold. It was quite gothic feeling. And so that's kind of, I guess, what I based the house on, a lot of that like landscape and the isolation of that castle within a kind of quite close to Edinburgh, but it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. And the other bit of small inspiration, because I've mentioned in my, like when I'm talking about it, there's weird moths. So similar to Antic, there's some weird biology going on, to do with, and that kind of comes into the folklore. But that was because in the castle I was staying, there was a cave underneath it, and we got to go and explore. It's like a Pictish cave. We got to go and explore it, and it was absolutely full of both the biggest spiders I've ever seen, and moths. So the moths made it into the book. The spiders didn't, just because, yeah, too many creepy crawlies.
Fair.
But also there's when I was doing some research into kind of moth folklore and the way they are kind of messengers to the other world, that fits really well with a sort of gothic theme, and what happens later on in the book kind of fits quite nicely. So yeah, it's also a little bit about death and the rituals around death and how we, yeah, kind of curses and how we try and seek to explain it and stop death, I guess, in a way. So yeah, I hope it's sort of a classic Gothic, but of contemporary setting, and quite Scottish. So that
So
was
good. Oh,
the
thank you,
gist
Lynn.
of it.
Fantastic. Well, I think now it's time for you perhaps to give us a little taste of In This City Where It Rains.
I'm going to start with Maggie's first chapter, and it sort of feeds into that waypoints, which was the very first thing I wrote for this book. It was raining again, but it always rained in this city. The heavier the downpour, the stronger Maggie's ghosts came out, and tonight it was torrential. Umbrella in hand, Maggie traversed the winding cobbled streets on her way home from her bar shift, dodging the spectral figures as she went. They stood here and there, hunched under street lamps or standing in ever constant puddles, bodies and faces distorted by the layers of rain. To most passers-by who denied the presence of the dead, they looked like a reflection or shadow. But Maggie had always been able to see them, especially on the dreariest of days, because ghosts are drawn to dreary things like rain clouds, cold empty streets, and sad young women. When she was younger and still getting used to her ghosts, Maggie would ask her gran who the rain people were, the one with half-melted faces, expressionless except for the occasional grimace. At first, not knowing any better, she would describe them in detail, even give some of the regular ones names, like Rose, the woman on West Street who stood outside the house with the flowers, and Wallace, the boy that liked to sit on the old church wall after dark. It was how she mapped the city, her own ghostly waypoints. West Street became Rose Way, and the crescent outside the church became Wallace's smile. Her gran had at first entertained her descriptions of the strange figures she saw in the rain that would look at her with that distant look in her eyes. Then she'd give a twisted smile as she said, "You have such an imagination, Maggie." Then later, "This needs to stop, Maggie. You're too old for this." Now she kept the knowledge of the ghosts to herself, the way they changed, the places they haunted, the corners they lingered in. Outside, the ghosts didn't always stay in the same place either. Sometimes they moved or gathered, and when the rain was heavy, Maggie could even hear them, an echoing thrum of gathered spirits amongst the screams of rain. She could hear them now, though she wasn't in the mood to acknowledge them. It was late and she was tired after a busy shift. She just wanted to get home, back to her flat where it was dry and warm, and where the ghosts receded to shadows lurking in the corners, out of sight, mostly out of mind. Now that she was older, Maggie barely flinched on passing them. Even if they walked into or near her, they would simply disappear under her umbrella, melting into the dry. The ghosts, at least, had never been able to touch her. When she arrived back at the terraced flat, her gran's cat Arlo greeted her with the same hungry mewing he always did, crying as if she hadn't left a full bowl of food and a heated blanket on before she headed out for a shift. After realising he wasn't getting fed this late, he ambled back through to the thin crack in the door to her gran's room. Maggie pushed the door slightly more ajar and peered in. Arlo had returned to his bed that sat on the shelf beside her gran's rocking chair, which was creaking slightly back and forth, cast in shadow. "Sleep well," Maggie said before leaving them be. She knew her gran could never hear her, even if the routine of it made her feel less lonely in this grey city full of ghosts. Her gran wasn't as solid as the ones outside. She was just a shadow, stretched and amorphous, like a cloud above rain. Sometimes at night, Maggie heard the click-clack of her knitting needles. Other times she heard her singing the same lullaby her mum often sang to her in her dreams. "Rain, rain, go away, come again another day." And almost every time she wanted to go in and tell her she had told her so, that the ghosts were real, because here she was, dead, and still sitting in her chair, singing or knitting. Meanwhile, Maggie had been left to face her world of shadows alone.
Oh, thank you so much, Lyndsey. Absolutely fabulous. I was just reflecting on the fact that if I wake up and I hear the click clack of someone's knitting in the middle of the night, I'm probably gonna pass out. But no, it's good to talk about ghost stories and death and all of these things. We seem to be in the right time of the year, I suppose, with the winter.
Yeah.
So I would like to touch a little bit on the themes. And now, obviously, both of you before talked about some of the similarities, of the aspect that your novellas touch. But I also am aware that you have explored particular themes, I suppose, in a sense, within your stories. And so before we we finish the evening together, I would like us to talk a little bit about this. Andy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, for me, I find I quite often use theme as a way of developing the characters for a story. Like pick a theme and then think about different approaches to that, then for people to express. So I did a th similar thing when I had with Walking Wounded Land, which was with Wizard's Tower, where it was different approaches to walking, different ways we walk through the world, and that became what it was about, whether that's hiking or going on a pilgrimage, things like that, or funerals. And then with this one, and I think the novella's particularly good for that because you've got enough space to explore all the different approaches to it.
Yeah.
But it keeps it quite compact. It keeps you focused on that theme. So again, go back to Ashes of the Ancestors. It was a small number of people in a contained space, and I've tried to do that again here. And the one I wanted to look at was how people face death. So then when I was starting to plan the novel, like the novella, because I am quite a planning kind of writer. I like to know I have a whole structure with like a little spreadsheet with different plot threads and things. And so when I was defining the characters, it really started from that. I'd read a book about death and how we think about it as human beings, and so they became that. So Clifford, the protagonist, he's someone who he's initially very despairing about it. It's that nihilism, and then that then turns to denial, trying to escape the death, which in this instance means trying to look for a way to escape this planet where everybody is effectively dead. Then you've got Emmy, who is the person who takes him in, start showing him how to handle this space. And she's that I end up bringing two approaches together there. She is the person who's most at peace with what's happening. She's accepted what's going on with her. She's not trying to struggle against it, but she's also chosen to try and save others for as long as possible. And so she's the one who kind of ends up holding this loose community together because she actually looks after them. And then there are other incidental characters who reflect different reactions to death and who maybe turn up just for a chapter or for part of a scene. But the other main ones that they encounter are this group of corporate mercenaries who've been sent down to the planet, and they are meant to be there in a very deliberate way to try and get samples of what's going on, because they represent our attempt to sort of striving against death through constant activity. Through if you keep on doing things, you push that darkness out of your mind.
Yeah.
But I think there's also this illusion we give ourselves that if I exercise enough, if I eat the right things, if I live the right life, then I'm not gonna. It's fine. I can just keep putting it off and put it off, put it off.
Yeah.
And that also ties neatly into how modern society works, particularly how capitalism works. And it's not the first time that I've thought through a theme and then I've accidentally ended up making the antagonists the most capitalistic characters, which is either maybe a reflection of our world, maybe a reflection of my politics, probably a bit of both.
Sure.
And so they became these people who Clifford is drawn to because he sees them as a way out, but where actually their approach is kind of it's dysfunctional. You've got this character, Private Morel, and he's literally they're gathering up these ingredients to make this medicine, and he's literally stopping partway through to do press ups because like his high tech watch on his wrist is telling him that he needs to do this many more press ups today because then he's done enough exercise and that will keep his health insurance costs down. And it's like he's stuck on this planet. None of this stuff matters, but he's so trained into it. That is how he does it. And that just ends up working because I suppose because they've all got these very different responses to the core thing that's happening in the book. That creates interesting dynamics and interesting contrasts and conflicts between the characters. Even when they're working together, they're pulling in different directions on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a lot of fun, and it was kind of cathartic to work through that. Oh God, I placed there, but I'm not sure it's left me feeling any happier about the subject. It's just
Well, it's a good way of exploring it for sure. Can I ask you, Andy, about the planet Abaddon?
yeah,
Because obviously, as when I first read the novella, the planet itself was a character larger than life, and although you haven't necessarily set out with an ecological theme in mind, but there is something there that brings your mind back to nature.
absolutely. Yeah, I think again, I think that comes into this thing of whether you're in peace with the world or in conflict with the world and constantly grappling against it, and that's part of it. There is this there is this cycle of life on Abaddon where the rain falls, and after a heavy rain, these I'm to remember the order of the things. I should know that these crystals come out, and fungus spread comes up, and then these ratish creatures come out to eat the fungus. So there's these three different parts, and the characters have to engage with that because those are the resources they need to survive. So they have to engage with that environment. Uh, and so, yeah, I suppose it did become quite crucial, but it's also interesting. It is this environment that has, in a sense, rejected humanity or turned against it. And the reasons for that become clear late, or not clear, but there is some stuff that comes up later on that kind of adds that. And I almost said a thing, I thought,
No, no,
I
no.
better not say that. That's spoiling like the last third of the book. And that kind of leads into the ecological theme some more now that I think about it. But so that is important because we are reliant on that
Yeah.
environment. And I think part of it is that you see that Emmy has made peace with the fact that this is the world she lives in. And that's what allows her to function within it and to just keep functioning within it as long as she's still alive.
Yeah.
Whereas the others are, for the most, trying to escape those constraints of what is possible in the world they live in. And that's what's destructive. And so Clifford is then torn between these two approaches. You've got Emmy who's like, we live with this. And Captain Tork and his people who are like, no, we are going to find a way that we don't have to live with the limits of this planet, that we can just gobble all this stuff up and grab it and zoom off into space, and we're sorted. Goodbye, planet. Goodbye, all of you. And yeah, so yeah, in that regard, I have again, like the thing with always making the capitalists the villains. I have just, even without intending to, I've slipped into my own political values, and it is right there, yes. And I do think that greenery at the start makes it more. It puts that more to the surface, doesn't it? Because it immediately puts that nature there, which I probably would have slipped into anyway, because that when you've got a wild planet where for the most part all that remains of sentient life is some old ruins and like abandoned rocket towers from centuries before and things like this, it's gonna mostly be full of life. But again, it came back to that misheard lyric and me standing at the back of the crowd at a gig in our local indie venue, just going, "Oh yeah, it's green. It's the green," at that crucial moment. So yeah.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Andy.
Right.
So from the lusciousness to the weather in Edinburgh, in this
Mhm.
alternative Edinburgh. So what about your theme, Lindsay, your themes for the novella?
Yeah, sure. I'm also so intrigued by Andy's novella. I'm gonna have to take time to read it. It's so up my street. I also end up with when I write sci-fi with the capitalist villain, so I can't seem to get past that. I think it's kind of the thing to do. Yeah, I think in terms of themes in a city where it rains, they didn't come to me. I don't think I went in intentionally to explore a certain theme. They kind of came out naturally. I sort of started with this very strong image of a character in my head and this concept of the ghosts and how that sort of developed. And so naturally, I think the exploration of death and also how people accept death and move on. And you've got a character, Maggie, who's sort of trapped in this city, but doesn't really. I mean, the city has a sort of weird effect of stopping you from thinking about what else is going on in the outside world. So it is a sort of cursed city in that way. And Maggie will start to question that as time goes on. But I think until then, she's feeling quite isolated in the city. There's that she's come to know the ghosts and become comfortable with them. Death isn't really a scary thing for her. What's more scary for her is living, I suppose. And that's the sort of theme that goes throughout the book is her kind of accepting, yeah, going through the book and learning to live through her engaging with death. I don't think I've ever put that into words before, but that kind of makes
Yeah,
sense
yeah,
in her character journey. And of course, because she can see ghosts, she really worries about making connections with anyone's in case they die and then she sees them. So she doesn't want to be haunted by people that she knows. She already has her gran like living there. They kind of stay somewhere, the ghosts tend to stay somewhere that's important to them, which is how she ends up mapping the city because they kind of stay in the same place. So that idea, she's gotten so used to them, but she doesn't really want to get to know anyone in case they become her ghosts. Until she meets someone who she realizes is like her, and it sort of breaks that sort of isolation. The other, I guess, theme that's sort of classic with that sort of gothic isolation as well is that sort of house that comes into it. So I really wanted to also write a gothic house story, and I was trying to work out how that would kind of come into the city that I'd come up with. But that's where the kind of Boleskine House inspiration I spoke about, and that's where the occult and the rituals and everything all came in. So I had to answer, what's going on with this cursed city? What's the reason for all of this? Why are there ghosts? So I basically had to answer the questions I'd set for myself with the initial concept that I'd come up with. So that tends to be how I figure out stories, working backwards rather than having a potentially set idea in mind. And I'm really interested in sort of the ethics around occult practice and rituals and seances and mediumship. And one of the characters in the book, Xavier Logan, his family kind of live in this Gothic house, and he was an occultist. He kind of was practicing medium, and I'm not going to say what happens and why things change because I'm not going to spoil it. But I find exploring that really interesting about the kind of potential exploitation and danger of engaging with some of these issues are, while I also find it quite fascinating and I feel like I'm open-minded about some of this stuff. Yeah, so I really wanted to kind of speak a little bit about that entertainment aspect of it and how people get drawn in through either loss or through wanting to engage with some spirit world. So that kind of comes into the book as well. I'm trying really hard not to spoil it right
No,
now.
it's very hard. It's very hard. You're doing really
Yeah,
well, though.
it's that sort of book with twists and turns. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's other, I guess the sort of navigating a city, that psychogeography idea kind of was threaded through. And that kind of goes hand in hand with her isolation through the book. I don't know what that says about me having spent a month in a castle, and feeling a little bit isolated, but
Do you know what? I was thinking, so there is a cover made by Cock Show for one of our books called Uncanny Bodies. It was an anthology, well, a hybrid work with scientists and writers set around Edinburgh, but the theme was about our own body becoming uncanny to us.
okay, yeah.
The cover is very reminiscing of this Edinburgh that you have created in my mind. Now that
Mm,
leads me to, I suppose, this idea of Edinburgh is such an incredible location for Gothic.
hmm
Naturally so. And in fact, we have an upcoming book by Orcadian author Barbara Stevenson about Scottish Gothic as non-fiction, but
Okay.
Barbara has a chapter dedicated to Edinburgh, and it is such an interesting thing. So reading your novella, and of course, just looking outside of my window,
Hmm.
I was just watching this beautiful landscape, especially on a rainy day, and I thought I could absolutely see the ghost of of Lyndsey's story. So, in terms of Edinburgh, in the Gothic sense, in the Scottish Gothic, what do you think about this city as
Yeah, I think it's partly how it looks, right? And even if you don't know anything about the history, if you don't know any of the stories, you kind of arrive in Edinburgh, and there is this sense of history and layer, like the way it's built in sort of layers of buildings and old historical buildings and just beautiful kind of different Gothic styles. Got cathedrals, you've got monuments, and all these sorts of very kind of typical buildings that you see when you go to Edinburgh. And then, of course, there's a sort of a lot of dark history in Edinburgh streets and some famous history. And you've got witchcraft trial history, which is, um, yeah, kind of there, and Burke and Hare, and all sorts of, yeah, quite gothic-y, um,
Absolutely.
gruesome,
Yeah.
gruesome history. There's a lot of ghost stories, a
Yeah.
lot of tales of hauntings. I think it's just a very, it's a city touched by a lot of like those sorts of stories, and it makes it a very interesting setting to explore. But also, I think one of the things I love so much about Edinburgh, which you don't always see in cities, is it's easy to get lost in, even having lived there for years. I'm like, I don't know where I am right now, or I followed the wrong path because there's twisting streets and crescents and side streets and stairwells that come out of nowhere. And there's something very kind of disorienting sometimes if you're just walking around the city of Edinburgh that can maybe not make you feel unsettled, but makes you feel a little bit like you're kind of at the will of the city in a strange way, which is what I wanted to get a little bit into the book,
Mhm.
and how she's exploring it. So she doesn't, I don't name the city as Edinburgh in the book, partly because it's sort of been forgotten what the city is, and the people there. Yeah, sorry, I'm not going to spoil.
I was gonna say,
I'm stopping there. But yeah, just that sort of like even just the streets of Edinburgh kind of inspired the movement that characters go through in the book. And I talked a little bit about, well, I have a line in the book, I think, about there being so many cemeteries in Edinburgh. And there are like, I feel like you can walk 10, 15 minutes and there's like a very atmospheric, beautiful, sometimes the only green space nearby is a cemetery. Like I go for walks. The closest green space to me is walking around a cemetery, and I do that quite often. And it seems like a nice, peaceful place. And for
yes.
Maggie, actually, the ghosts don't appear in the cemetery because so it's one of the quieter places that she can go and not see any ghosts because they do tend not to haunt where they're buried in my book. They tend to haunt what's meaningful to them, if haunt is the right word. They're just kind of existing in the place that was meaningful to them. And that's usually not a cemetery, which I find it interesting. Sorry, I'm going on such a tangent, but just that cemeteries are often seen as like spooky places, and you think, why would a ghost haunt that place in particular? Why would there be spooky things there? Like feel like it's probably the more peaceful place, but I understand why people kind of, yeah, they want to imagine that that someone is there in that cemetery. So yeah, that was something I wanted to kind of delve into a little bit, that sort of ritual of death. But yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I think that thing with the cemeteries is really interesting. The extent to which, like, we think of them as places for the dead, but really they're places for the living, aren't they? They're
Exactly,
places where you
exactly.
go to
Yeah.
remember.
yeah.
There's um, I saw an article recently about how there's a growing number of cafes at cemeteries in Berlin, which I didn't realize it was a whole thing, but I've actually been to one of these places.
Interesting.
Um, and Yeah, because it's a green space within the city, and people are going there anyway to sort of to remember people.
Hmm.
And then it also becomes a place, you maybe go there for a walk because it's yeah, but I'd not thought about the fact that, like you said, why would the dead go there? They've got nothing, they've got nothing for it. That's fascinating. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. Um, you're right, Lindsay. Edinburgh does have a big number of cemeteries. I was actually thinking about it would have been probably just in the summer. I was walking through Greyfriars Bobby Cemetery,
Hmm.
and there were so many people. It was actually a beautiful sunny day. And there were a lot of people. A lot of people go there because, of course, there are very strong connection to the whole Harry Potter
Mm.
family of characters, but also the church itself, and of course the dog, great for
Yeah.
other hobbies. But it was interesting to see that so many people were walking through, you know, quite relaxed, enjoying the place, and again, that's a little bit of what you were saying. And equally, I was thinking about Rome, my city. There is a cemetery called Verano where you have entire area dedicated to literary figures,
Mm.
important political figures, and so and the monuments are absolute beautiful sculpture,
Hmm.
and so you're walking through these huge streets with very tall cypress trees, and it's so peaceful, right? In pretty much in the center of such a big city, the like Rome, and it is so uh, interesting as a discovery, as a place of remembrance, as a place
Mm.
to think, and somehow though death doesn't feel that scary, when you are
Yeah.
like that, and I think also for us human beings, sometimes it is the thought of dying rather than death itself, perhaps, that scares most people. That
Hmm.
links to what you were saying, Andy, about trying to keep death at
Yeah.
arm's length, is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
process, of dying that we maybe tend to be afraid of. And this turned into
Yeah.
very, sort of dark and
But
negative.
this is part of what I love and what you've done here, Francesca, that like there you've brought together these novellas that kind of connect, and that like I'm really looking forward to reading this novella, and I love
Yeah.
the idea of these kind of having these ideas that reflect off each other. There's Jake Casella Brookins, I think he's called, American guy who does the Meal of Thorns podcast where they do literary critique on science fiction and fantasy works. He often talks about stories that rhyme with each other, which I think
Mm.
is such a good way
Yeah.
of like thinking about that connection, the way they bring something that's similar but not the same, and then reading them in like get something more out of them. Like I feel like I'm going to go away and read yours, and then that's going to make me think about mine in new ways and get
Yeah.
new things out of that. I'm kind of really excited for that now. So yeah,
Thank you,
That's
but
really nice.
the novellas are fantastic, and absolutely um, they are echoing each other. And I think this conversation today also flagged up and teased out those familiar
yeah.
themes. Absolutely. Oh, excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us tonight, and we are so looking forward to hear your thoughts, readers, about our novellas. So they will be out on February the 3rd. Andrew Knighton with All That Is in the Earth for your science fiction side of life, and Lyndsey Croal in the City Where It Rains for your gothic pleasure. So thank you so much. It was lovely to have you with us. And thank you all to you for being with us tonight for our premiere and whenever else you're going to be watching this lovely video with us. So thank you. And thank you, Lyndsey. And thank you, Andrew, for being with us.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Bye bye.